Because we need more psychology. We need more understanding of human nature, because the only real danger that exists is man himself. He is the great danger, and we are pitifully unaware.
All asked ourselves at least once in our lifetimes if we are good people. Are we actually genuinely nice people? And we also ask ourselves, how can we overcome some aspects of our lives, some aspects of who we are, or at least what we think we are. And on the other hand, we also ask ourselves, how is it possible in history, for example, that horrible things happened and it felt like everyone was okay with that? How was everyone in a psychosis, like collectively in a psychosis? How is it even possible? We look at also serial killers, we look at people who are criminals, we look at, those people, we see them, we are intrigued by them, by the darkness they withhold, and we're like, how is it possible that someone could reach that point? This is what is called the shadow self. The shadow is basically something that is created throughout your whole life, essentially in your childhood, and it is the unconscious part of who you are. You live your whole life battling because you do have, inside of you there are two powers. You have the ego and you have, the shadow is the unconscious, the uncovered, the unknown, the dark side, if we may call it like that. Although it's not always that dark. It has a thick layer of shame. We will see where it comes from and what it can look like. And on the other part, you have an ego. The ego is basically a persona that is created, curated perfectly by you to be presented to the world. And you have these two forces who are battling inside of yourself. They could even create a cognitive dissonance inside of you because you don't know who you are, you don't know what to do, you feel lost all the time, and you're always like, I don't know who I am, and I don't know what to do, and I feel like there's something inside of me that is dragging me down, that I'm battling my demons. So as someone who is, and I believe will always be interested in psychoanalysis, psychology, etc., I completely fell in love with Carl Jung, the person you saw at the beginning of the video. He is basically the person who theorized what is the shadow. He created archetypes for us to understand it better. He wrote a lot of books about it, and a lot of people studied psychoanalysis through the lens of this psychoanalyst. So when I was young, I remember I think it was a podcast or something like that introduced me to him. So it was an amazing discovery, and it made me really understand deeper aspects of ourselves, at least of myself or the human psyche. So what is the shadow? One might ask. It's basically the unconscious, as I said. The things that, how it is created is basically you being a young toddler. Everything goes back to childhood, okay? I think we pretty much know that now, that everything goes back to childhood. When you're a child and you have like parents or parental figures, they really pave the way in which you are going to grow up. So a concrete example, if for example you are someone, you're a child who is never listened to, your emotions are never validated, like you feel sad or you're feeling angry or your boundaries are being crossed, etc. If you are someone who had a parent who themselves, they don't really have boundaries and they don't really understand the concept, and they're always crossing yours and not understanding when you're crying. They even maybe get violent with you, or they sort of start to like verbally abusing you to stop expressing those emotions. You're gonna repress that. And it's gonna be stored. It doesn't leave, it's gonna be stored, and it's gonna start to stack up. And with that, you're gonna have a thick layer of shame around those feelings. Shame creates also anger. And with time, these emotions are gonna be your shadow, technically. after the I mean, there are two aspects of the shadow as a concept. You have the shadow self, which I just explained, and you have also something else, which is the collective shadow. Like I said in the beginning of the video, sometimes you see history and you're like, how is that even possible? For example, racism, genocides, colonialization. How is it possible that all these atrocities were happening and it was a norm in a way, you know? Especially racism, for example. It's been a very short time when it started to be something that is not acceptable, not normal. As I said in the beginning, it feels like the world in itself is in a psychosis collectively, and it's insane. And I think one fuels the other, but definitely the shadow self is the creator. So basically the collective shadow is the byproduct of it. Kind of concrete examples of today's pop culture about the manifestation of accepting the shadow in a way. For example, we have this trend that was happening, I mean, a trendy thing on social media, which was my villain era. Mostly it was directed to females that were tapping into their dark feminine. Also, I saw males hopping on the trend, but I really think it was centered in female audiences. So to tap into your villain era is basically to accept your shadow self. It's for you to recognize the power that you never really saw in yourself because you didn't accept it, and then you take it in and you start to shed the light on it and accept it as part of who you are and let it empower you. So I was talking about, because we do have to know that there is a sort of degrees to what the shadow represents in one's psyche. It could be like an iceberg basically, and at the tip top of it are emotions like laziness, rage, jealousy, envy, etc., etc., things that we repress in ourselves. We don't accept it to be part of our personality. It's very rare to meet someone who would be like, yeah, I tend to be someone who's jealous, I tend to be someone who's lazy, I tend to be someone who doesn't keep their promises, etc. It's something that your ego would never let you accept or tap in. But if we go deeper, and this is of course once again due to the upbringing, due to the environment you're growing up in, your shadow self could be something that is way, let's say, darker than others. For example, the urge for cruelty, the urge for controlling others, the urge to inflict pain on others, weird sexual fantasies, etc. Weird. I mean, in psychology, people are not seen as weird, okay, but let's say extreme sexual fantasies. And as I said, since everything is linked, probably people who were victims of abuse, unfortunately, do have this stack up of shame and guilt. So obviously, like for example, serial killers. Amazing things that I found when it comes to the conversations about the shadow and the concept itself is how many people in the art space took liberties into describing it the best way possible in various ways and various materials, books, movies, art, like paintings, etc. And I did collect few things that I really felt like it was talking about it, tackling it. So I think the first thing that I want to talk about, and it's not just about the book, but the person in itself, really someone who tapped into their shadow self, completely leaving the light. And unfortunately, it did create something extremely beautiful. I'm not gonna lie. I have his book, so it's basically Baudelaire, and this is his only book actually that he has ever written. It's called Les Fleurs du Mal. I don't know, maybe you probably know it, maybe. And what's interesting is that Baudelaire was living an extremely reckless life, and he also had a very miserable death. What you can see through this writing is really how when you don't express, when you don't really, let's say, tackle your shadow in a way that is conscious, you can really find yourself in the abyss of your persona. You can basically find yourself in the, let's say, rock bottom of what a human being could be. I think this book is basically the journey of Baudelaire from a normal, let's say, life where he was just trying to discover himself and Paris and the world and the arts, etc. And like little by reading the poetry, the poems collection, you start to see that he goes from light to extreme darkness from the beginning to the very end. Like even the titles of the sections goes from beauty, like talking about flowers and the sun and the city and people, to talking about death and tackling other, let's say, mythical figures who would be considered dark, obviously, honestly. So I think Baudelaire would win a prize for being someone who really discovered the darkest self ever. Obviously, he cannot be... he's obviously the second one after Marquis de Sade. I don't really want to talk about Marquis de Sade. That man is insane. I don't know if you know who he is, but if you do, I hope you have a therapist. That's all I can say. But Marquis de Sade is a whole other subject. He was completely inhuman. That's not even the shadow self. He really he tapped into the things a human can do physically and to others. And there were actually a lot of movies, not a lot, but there was a movie inspired by an adaptation of his book. I don't think I'm gonna put the picture, but I'm just gonna say that his name, Marquis de Sade, de Sade, that's where came the name sadism. So I think this is it. I think we know where this is going. So when it comes to books, I do have another book that really explains the tapping into the dark side in an unconscious way and the consequences of that. It's called Le Rouge et le Noir from Stendhal. I think it's called Red and Black in English? I don't know. Because I read it at school, just like Baudelaire, in French. So it's also about someone who comes from poverty and then he rebels against society and it ends up in a murder and a total psychosis, etc. So I think these two really describe, when it comes to literature, these two and the third one do describe kind of the shadow self, maybe in an extreme way, not in a happy way, but definitely to warn us, let's say. And I find it really interesting that people could devote their lives, basically destroy their lives for a work of art, like Baudelaire, for example. And it really says a lot about how it is when you're not aware of yourself. We also have a lot of people who tackle this subject. And one movie that, of course, pops up directly is The Black Swan. So it is the perfect description of being completely submerged by things that you cannot accept in yourself. As we can see, the one that wears white is the personification of the ego and the person that you created for yourself, and the one who is wearing black is basically the shadow self trying to take over. So I think it's one of the movies who really describes this subject perfectly. We also have The Fight Club. But The Fight Club also speaks about an actual clinical condition, like a psychiatrist. It's about a little condition in people's minds, but it does talk about the shadow self. If you don't accept it and you just go with your life, it's gonna take over. This is what darkness does. It's basic. But the more you shed light on it, the more you try to accept it and bring it to the light, the more it becomes part of yourself that you can control, and through love and acceptance. Obviously there are a lot of songs, but for some reason I had one song that completely popped inside of my mind when I was thinking about the subject and I was scripting the video, and it's a rap song. It's a French rap song from the singer Damso, and it's called Feu de Bois. It's a very strong song, and it describes, and I think in one of the interviews he did explain what it is for him, and he described that it's basically the shadow self taken over. And I think it's a very interesting, dark, let's say harsh song, but it's also very beautiful. When I heard it first, I was like, what are you talking about? And then it came up today when I was working on the script, as I said, and I heard it again, and I was like, this is the perfect embodiment of this subject, basically. I think to conclude this video, I would just like to tell you that as much as this subject feels heavy and a bit dark-ish, it's yourself and even the parts of yourself who are suppressed right now, that you're aware of or not, deserve to be expressed somehow, somewhere. I would maybe, of course, I am someone who is a big advertiser of writing, journaling, and so is Carl Jung. So just be bluntly honest with yourself in a paper, ink on paper. And the more you're gonna put the light on the things that are blocking you, the things that hurt you, the things that you are not able to accept because maybe you just don't want to accept the fact that it's a parent who made you feel this way at a certain point. When you try to dig inside a behavior you have, maybe you just don't want to stop a certain habit or a certain addiction because it's something that makes you feel good about yourself, but also you're battling inside trying to stop it in a way and you don't know what to do. I genuinely believe the best way is to be honest with yourself. That's it. Like, you don't need to go crazy about like hyper healing and being maniac about well-being and you have to heal. It's a lifelong process. The most important thing when it comes to healing and accepting parts of ourselves is to unlearn things. You need to unlearn to make space for learning new things. You need to unlearn the fact that this is how I should react when someone tells me the truth about myself. This is how I should react when someone is trying to make a boundary with me. This is how I react when someone is trying to... I just genuinely believe that you should be gentle with yourself. All of us come with a background. All of us come with a package deal. All of us come with a lot of stuff on our back, especially if people who are watching me are from where I am from. And we know how society shaped us, how much generational trauma works, and how our families, unfortunately, are themselves conditioned. So we always hear about breaking the cycle and, like breaking the generational curse, etc. But it's not always something that you have to go for with strength and pain and etc. Sometimes, even if it's maybe a bit painful, but sometimes it's just writing down a letter for yourself, writing down a letter for your future self or your past self or someone you love, and just describing things. Maybe it's writing something really honest about yourself. Maybe this video can encourage you by putting up the title of your letter, "You Are Not a Good Person." And from there, just unleash. Try to write whatever comes in mind, and I can assure you that if you are extremely honest with yourself, you're gonna see change and you're gonna feel more at ease with yourself because you don't have that cognitive dissonance anymore. You're true to yourself. You know what you deserve. You know what you want, what you don't want. You are okay with the fact that you're gonna be a forever learner in life, and you're gonna forgive people who did you wrong, and actually you're gonna try to spread kindness, love, comprehension, and basically beauty and healing around. And I think this is the beauty of it. Don't be afraid of it. The shadow is just you, that little boy, little girl who is inside of you, who's hurt and who's crying in the corner because no one was there to hug them and tell them that it's okay. And now you have the means. Try to speak to that little you and tell them that it's okay. That no matter what it is, you will always be the adult they needed, because you are the adult they needed this whole time. Take care of yourself. See you next week.